And so, first of all, welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining us in this third and final session of Makya and Spaya. So, today we are diving into one of the most practical questions in generative AI. Can AI actually rediscover chemistry that works? And more importantly, can it do it more efficiently than existing platforms? So today I'll walk you through two short experiments. First, we will assess how Makya performs in the C1s targets, a real validation test where we challenge the platform to navigate the chemical space and converge on known actives. And second, a straight comparison of Makya versus Reinvent 4 and reaction flow to see how can each of them behave on the goal in the molecular rediscovery and synthetic feasibility. So before we go into the science, I want to start with this idea. Rediscovery is a fundamental sanity check. It tells us whether an AI system understands the chemical space well enough to converge back on meaningful realistic molecules, not just generate random patterns. So throughout this presentation, when we look at pocket interaction, design strategies, and finally benchmark comparison, the core question behind all of it is the same. Can the model navigate real medicinal chemistry and recover known actives? Because if it can do that, then we can trust it to explore new ideas in a meaningful and controlled way. So here's today's plan. First, a quick look at the key interactions in the C1s binding site. Second, how we define the generation strategy. Third, the chemistry-guided settings we use to steer the exploration. And finally, a direct comparison between Makya and Reinvent 4 and reaction flow on a molecular rediscovery task. So before we jump into today's webinar, just once again, a reminder that you can scan this QR code or you can click on the link that we'll share in the comment section, because here you will find more information about what we do, our capabilities. You will find publications, our last webinars, user videos with demos and demonstrations, so you can have more information about us. So let's start with the C1s binding sites. So the key interactions and the chemical series that define the search space. So C1s is the serine protease in the C1 complex that initiates the classical complement pathways. When its activity becomes dysregulated, the downstream cascade is overactivated, and that amplification is what drives several complement-mediated diseases. So the idea behind inhibiting C1s is simply to stop the chain reaction early. So controlling C1s activity helps in autoimmune and inflammatory disorders, rare diseases like angioedema, and there's even emerging relevance in oncology. So it's a target with both a clear mechanism of action and a real-world clinical applications. So inside binding site, there are three distinct pockets that are critical for inhibitors design. S1 drives specificity through pockets with asparagine, and also importantly, most active compounds form a strong binding interaction here in these pockets. The second one is S2, which is mainly hydrophobic area defined by histidine and phenylalanine, where aromatic groups tend to fit well. And finally, we have site 3, which is near a glycine that can accommodate additional hydrogen bonds. So these three pockets outline the interaction patterns we expect potent inhibitors to reproduce. So many potent C1s inhibitors use amidine and guanidine groups because they mimic the substrate interaction with the asparagine in the S1 pockets, displaying strong binding. But amidines are also very basic and typically lead to poor pharmacokinetics, so exposure becomes a problem. So this is why non-amidine S1 binders are attractive. So several serine protease inhibitors have shown that you can maintain activity while improving oral bioavailability. So this motivated the shift toward exploring non-amidine chemical space for C1s. So here we're looking at the chemical starting point published from a program of Takeda. It's positioned the bicyclic group directly in the S1 pockets, forming the expected interaction with asparagine. So the rest of the scaffold extends toward S2 and S3, picking up additional context with residues such as histidine and phenylalanine. However, the carbonyl groups appears unnecessary, displaying kind of not real interactions in these S2 pockets, and the idea is to change it for a more relevant functional group. So in terms of activity, it shows moderate potency on C1s around 4.5 micromolar and a good selectivity against other serine proteases. So this lead will serve as a reference point to assess the binding mode and is key to the design strategy from which we'll start our molecular rediscovery today. So here's how we set up the rediscovery exercise. So we start from the Takeda reference compound, which anchors strongly in the S1 pockets. So the optimized structure we want to rediscover removes the carbonyl and adds a metafluoro group, improving the S2 interactions with histidine and phenylalanine. So to explore whether the model can converge back to this structure, we apply two different design strategies, each using a different starting point derived from the reference. So strategy 1, we keep the part of the scaffold that drives the S1 contacts and ask the model to maximize S2 interaction. In strategy 2, we use a starting point centered on the core piperazine and guide the generation through pharmacophore and shape similarity. So each strategy begins from a different fragment of the reference compounds and pushes the exploration in different ways. So now let's look at how we define the generation strategy, essentially how we guide the model to explore the right parts of the chemical space. So for the first strategy, the goal is to introduce diversity while still maximizing the key interactions in the binding sites. So we focus on the contact score and docking interactions with the residues in the S2 region, mainly the histidine and phenylalanine, while keeping the S1 anchor in place. So the idea here is simple. Can Makya recover structure 1 using only structural information as inputs without any further information such as activity data or additional examples? And for the second strategy, instead of focusing directly on the contact score, the generation, here we guide the generation using pharmacophore features and 3D shape similarity. So the idea is to preserve the key spatial arrangements of the reference ligand so the model naturally explore compounds that can reproduce the S2 interaction. And here the question becomes, can Makya rediscover structure 1 using only ligand-based information as inputs? So now let's look at the chemistry-guided settings. So all the practical controls we use to steer the generation towards realistic, synthetically accessible molecules. So the first stop is our 3D ligand-based information. So Makya can incorporate 3D ligand-based information directly into the generation process as reward function. So on the left, we use pharmacophore similarity to preserve the spatial arrangement of key features such as hydrogen bond donors, acceptors, hydrophobic regions, among others. On the right, 3D shape similarity ensures that the generated molecules follow a similar overall volume and contour. So both approaches help steer the AI towards designs that remain consistent with the non-active conformations. So now I propose you that we jump in directly into Makya so I can show you how you can set up the 3D ligand-based information directly in the platform. So let's go back into Makya. And before we start, this is just a small reminder that across all the series on this webinar, we've done together a lot of things, a lot of settings, like for example, generation, 3D structure base, risk scoring, among other things. So I won't go to the details to all of these that we've already seen. So if you missed the previous sessions or if you're interested about knowing how to do it from scratch, then I invite you to visit our YouTube videos where you find the 2 previous webinars. And also on LinkedIn, you can find the live of our previous webinars. So with this being said, let's jump into the software. And so our first stop is the 3D ligand base. So here, if we want to work with this, of course, as usual, we need to create a new project, which I'm going to call as today's webinar. And I'm going to use the pharmacophore as we were explaining before. And Makya will give you the option of minimizing your reference ligand, following different kind of information that you can find easily here in our platform. In this specific case, I'm not going to minimize my reference ligand because I already have the confirmation that it works for me and that I don't want just to change anything from that. So then after that, you click next. And so here Makya will prompt you to do one of the two things, either to input the smiles of your reference molecule or the SDF. The main difference between these two approaches is that with the smiles, of course, you don't have the conformation of your reference ligand, and therefore Makya will compute them for you and you can decide which one to use. On the other hand, unlike my case, when I already know the conformation of my ligand, then I can input the SDF as it is, and the conformation will be kept as it is without any further changes. So then we click next, and here we will find the ligand smiles and the anchor smiles. So the anchor is very important because it's the chemical feature that we're using to overlay the generated molecules with the reference ligand in order to compute our reward functions during generation. So then after that, the settings are ready and you are ready to continue with the setups in Makya and work with your generators. But before that, let's go into our second reward. So we've seen this already, which is the 3D structure base. So this we've discussed it extensively in our webinars. I won't go into exactly all details, but this is just a reminder. So structural information can be directly used as reward to guide molecule generation. So here you see the two rewards we use to optimize molecules. On the left, it's the MDAT docking, and on the right, we have the fingerprint interactions known as contact score. So this fingerprint interaction analyzes and quantifies how well new compounds reproduce critical ligand protein contacts that you as a user want to keep. So let's take a look on how you can set them up also in Makya. So let's go back into the platform. And if you're working with 3D ligand base, the first step is always upload your PDV and SDF and to choose the docking software that you want to work with. In this case, I'll be working with Pina. Then after that, we need to set up the contact score. For that, we need to go into the 3D structure base. And here I already prepared one for this webinar here, but I want to show you the main interactions that we are going to be targeting today. So here, the first thing is that Makya is detecting all the non-covalent interactions between the reference ligand and the protein. And for example, here, as we've seen also in previous webinar, if that interaction hasn't been detected, you can add it, like in this case, as I did here with the phenylalanine. So here we are targeting, of course, the S2 region of the pockets. And here the main two interactions that we are interested in keeping are the histidine and phenylalanine. And therefore, we have given a high weight to both of these interactions. So now we are ready because we already have the settings for the 3D ligand base and for the 3D structure base. So we can move forward into the generation steps. So for that, I've already prepared the two generators that we will be reviewing today. If you want to know how to do it from scratch, I encourage you to check our previous webinar series. But here we are just gonna take a look of how the settings are. So the first generator that we have is the 3D ligand base, and the second one is the 3D structure base. So let's start from the 3D ligand base. And just a small reminder, in Makya, remember that we have different categories. First is the chemical constraints. So everything related to your starting point, your building blocks and product constraints from the point of view of physical-chemical descriptors and also substructural constraints. So you have the control as a chemist on how you want to grow these molecules. Then you have the reward functions, which is going to tell the algorithm how to optimize these chemical constraints to maximize your targets. And then finally, we have the additional scores that we also reviewed in previous webinar, which basically it's everything that is post-processing. Makya will generate the molecules and then computes different kind of scores that you like to have. So if we start with the first stop, which is the initial fragment, here is very interesting because we are starting with minimal information, just the p-pyrazine core. And so from here, we're going to ask Makya to grow in two directions. This is something new that we haven't seen so far. So here, for example, we're going to use this reactive center. And with the reactive center, we're going to ask Makya to grow in this direction. And the second exit vector is going to grow the direction into another one. So starting from the core of your molecule, now you're going to ask Makya to add diversity to generate molecules moving into two different directions. From the point of view of the products, I added little of them. I'm working with molecular weight of 650 and a minimum QD of 0.3. And then, as always, I work with my pains and tox list, which are the substructures that I do not want to see in my generated molecules. So now we have our chemical constraints. Now we need to add our optimization function, the reward function, which is the 3D ligand base in this case. So here we are calling to the settings that I showed you before. And in this way, Makya knows that it needs to generate molecules and optimize them with respect to pharmacophore and 3D shape similarity. And just like this, with minimal settings, then you're able to start your generator. Before I show you the results for this generation, I will also show you the generator, the second one, but here the philosophy is more or less the same, but now we are starting from a different part of the molecule, the part that is related with the S1 interactions. And here we are asking Makya to grow molecules into one direction. From the point of view of the constraints, I use the same as the previous generators, as you can see here. And the main difference is that now the optimization that we're using is the 3D structure base. So here we see the two main interactions that we want to absolutely see in our generated molecules. And just like this, you can start generating your molecules. So let me show you the results for the first one, which is the 3D ligand base. So here, as you can see, Makya will give you a listing of molecules. And these molecules, they can be sorted out with respect to many scores, like, for example, pharmacophore, shape, even retrosynthesis score. You can also play around with our parallel coordinates, and here you can filter molecules with respect to more than one score. So in this way, you're going to filter the molecules that are not interested for you, and you can use it as a funnel just to get the molecules that you are interested in seeing. So, of course, you can see the details of the generation process. So here you have the generation tree, which, by the way, and very importantly, is not the retrosynthesis prediction. To do that, we need to go into SPIA. We will see afterwards. And so here we have our initial fragments and how Makya used building blocks and reactions in order to arrive into our last molecule. In terms of metrics, we have two new ones, which are the 3D pharmacophore and the 3D shape. And also, very importantly, we are going to give you the retrosynthesis score and the retrosynthesis step, which we take from SPIA, I'm sorry. So this retrosynthesis score is going to give you an idea of the synthesizability of this molecule. And then also, very importantly, you will be able to see your molecule in 3D. And for example, here, you can also compare it with respect to your reference molecule. So the question here, now we have everything. And the real question is, was Makya able to find these compounds, this active compound that we wanted to rediscover? And as you can see here, I already have it here. So the answer is yes, Makya was able to do so. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to show you the results. So here is the molecule that we wanted to rediscover with this exercise. And as you can see here again, we have all the decision that the algorithm took to get your final molecule, all the scoring, the metrics that I already presented to you, as well as the 3D shape similarity compared to the reference molecule. So the same thing for the 3D structure base, but in this case, instead, we have the molecule docked inside of the protein pockets because we are working with a 3D structure base. So the two different approaches, they were able to give us back the molecule that we wanted to rediscover. So going back to the slide decks, let's jump all of these because we already seen it together. So here is the key outcome from the rediscovery experiment. Makya was able to regenerate structure 1 purely from structural or 3D ligand-based inputs, and the model successfully converged back to the optimized design. So, and here we see the molecule taken out from Makya, displaying the key interactions at the site 1 and site 2 that we were looking for. We maintain the same bidirected interaction as with asparagine and observe new interactions on the site 2 with histidine and phenylalanine as published by Takeda. So now I want just to add the last concept of this webinar, which is respect to synthetic consideration. So Makya generates molecules by combining commercially available building blocks through non-reaction. So synthetic accessibility is integrated by design. By depending on the project, teams often have their own synthetic constraints, specific providers, preferred reactions, or cost limitations. That's where the retrosynthesis scoring option becomes useful. So it lets you prioritize generated molecules based on criteria that reflect your internal synthesis priorities. So let's take a quick look in Makya. How does it work? So as you can see here, we have a retrosynthesis option. So clicking here, we can create a new one. So I'm going to call it webinar intermediates. So here, as you can see, and if you've been here in our previous webinars, you can see that we have all the features that we also have in our Spaya platform. So here, for example, we have maximum steps, maximum price per gram, delivery time, packaging, all the providers that you can work with. Also, you can work with name reactions. We have around 3,000 name reactions that you can choose and pick and work with some of them, either just to work only with those, to forbid, or to work with at least one of them. And today we're going to work with intermediates. So here I'm going to ask Makya, Spaya actually, to give retrosynthesis routes using my piperazine as intermediate or starting point. So this is a very powerful tool because you as a chemist, you may have already an intermediate for which you already know your synthesis is very robust and you don't want to change it. And so starting from that intermediate, you can ask Spaya to give you routes based on that one. And so this is very powerful, and that's what we're going to do today. So we saved the parameters, and then as we've seen in previous webinar, we need to create a rescoring, which I already did here. So now the only thing that you need to do is to score new molecules based on these retrosynthesis features that I already built with you. So now we go into the data sets and we can score a new data set. Either we can just sketch a molecule, we can use a data set that we already had in Makya, or we can upload a new one, like my case here. So here I have a list of 12 molecules for which I want to have the retrosynthesis analysis. I am going to put rescoring and webinar. And here you just click save, and now Makya will start the process of giving you the results. I already prepared one, so let's open it here. So here you have the results, and as you can see, you have the retrosynthesis score and the retrosynthesis steps of all the listing molecules. So for all of them, we're going to give you the score, which goes from 0 to 1. 0, it means empty here, so Spaya was not able to find a route using these intermediates, not the default settings, and also the retrosynthesis steps. So for example, if we go into the last molecule, which I have it pulled here, and we go into Spaya, using the intermediates as the piperazine, and for example, here we have 3 retrosynthesis options that Spaya has given us. And so, for example, if we click in the first one, we see that we have a 2 steps synthesis, and we are starting with the piperazine that we ask the software to explore for us. And this is as usual, and as we've seen, you have information of your building blocks, you have information about the references, and you can do a high number of tests and strategy using these back and forth between Makya and Spaya. So with this being said, this is everything that I wanted just to show you regarding the Makya and the platform. So throughout this webinar, we've been able to explore a lot of things together. For example, 3D structure base, 3D ligand base, how to use Makya for hit discovery, but also how to use Makya for lead optimization and also for rediscovery. So as you can see, it's a very multifunctional platform that is not only focused in one case. You can use it widely in early stage drug discovery. So just to close this webinar series, now what I want to do is just to take a look at how Makya performs on the same rediscovery task compared to other two softwares, which are Reinvent 4 and Reaction Flow. So the following discussion is based on our published work about the technology behind Makya and Spaya. So if you want the full details, we lay them out in our preprint and peer review, which we will share here in the comment sections, as well as a white paper that you can take a look. So here we break down how growing and linking optimizers work, how the models are trained, and how the architecture mirrors chemical logic and reaction selection to retrosynthesis tree. So we'll start first with a comparison of Makya versus Reinvent 4 in a molecular rediscovery benchmark. So the idea is to assess whether the generators can reproduce predefined complex target molecules. So the targets shown here covers diverse chemical space, for example, heterocycles, fused system, sp3, which makes them meaningful test cases. So the optimization function used to guide the generations toward meaningful results is the same for both methods. Tanimoto similarity of Mongar fingerprints with radius 2. And we evaluate three typical generative tasks, which are the fragment growing, which we have explored extensively during this webinar series, fragment linking, which we review in our previous series of webinars, and unconstrained design, a generation without any chemical starting point, driven only by the reward, in this case, similarity. So these benchmark setups ensures a fair comparison between both software, Makya, and Reinvent 4. So here you see the rediscovery performance across the three tasks. So Makya consistently achieves higher maximum similarity among the top 500 generated molecules, and more importantly, achieves perfect reconstruction, a similarity of 1 for a larger number of targets. So Reinvent often reaches moderate similarity, but struggles to recover the full structure in most cases. So across all categories, Makya shows a stronger ability to converge back to the true target molecule. So here we compare Makya versus Reinvent 4 in a 3D structure-based benchmark. So for this study, we included 3 biological targets, and the goal is to evaluate how both generators perform when the optimization focuses on 3D scoring metrics, which we extensively seen during this webinar. So with these starting points and objectives defined, we can now directly compare Makya and Reinvent and how they behave when the optimization function is the 3D structure base. So here are the results for the 3D structure base in terms of synthetic accessibility. So across the 3 targets, Iktos, GenAI, Makya consistently outperform Reinvent 4. So for PIM1, both approaches perform reasonably well, but Iktos GenAI still edges ahead. But this is also due to diversity, as you will see in the following slide, because Makya generates more diverse molecules and still is able to give highly synthesizable results. For the other 2 targets, the difference now is dramatic. While Iktos GenAI generates hundreds of synthetically accessible molecules, Reinvent struggles producing far fewer compounds that meets even basic synthesizability criteria. And here we look at scaffold diversity, essentially how broadly each generator explores chemical space. Across all the 3 targets, Makya consistently produces molecules with greater structural diversity. We see this through 2 indicators. The first one is the lower mean pairwise Tanimoto similarity. So Makya's outputs are less similar to each other, meaning the model is exploring a wider chemical space instead of collapsing to a narrow region. And the second indicator is the unique scaffold. So Makya also produces a significantly higher number of distinct scaffolds. This means Makya is not just making small modification, but giving us new cores. And on the right, you can see the UMAP visualization for the 3rd targets. So Makya's molecules in blue occupy a broader chemical space than Reinvent in orange. And so Reinvent tend to cluster more tightly, while Makya spreads across multiple regions. And so finally, we also benchmark against Reaction Flow, which is a recently published synthesis-oriented generative framework. So like Makya, reaction flow assembles molecules from commercially available building blocks using predefined reaction templates, which ensures synthetic accessibility. So the evaluation here focuses on the unconstrained design task because reaction flow doesn't support fragment growing or fragment linking. So again, we're using Tanimoto similarity as the objective and the same benchmark targets as before. So in this comparison, Makya also outperforms reaction flow across all targets, and Makya reaches similarity 1 for several molecules, whereas reaction flow remains well below the threshold in most cases. So even against synthetic-aware competitors, Makya shows stronger rediscovery capabilities and more efficient navigation on chemical space. So finally here, I just wanted to give you high level to close the webinar, high level comparison of the three software. So Reinvent is a smile based, while Makya and Reaction Flow are reaction based, enable synthesis aware design from the beginning. In terms of design strategy, Makya is the only platform that natively supports all modes, meaning unconstrained, growing, linking, and macrocyclization. Reinvents also cover a wide use cases, but except macrocyclization, and reaction flow supports only unconstrained design. From structure-based generation, Makya is the only tool who can combine docking plus the residue level control. Reaction flow also uses BINA, but it does not have this residue level control. And Reinvent integrates docking via DocStream, giving access to different kind of software engines. On synthetic realism, Makya works with 1 million building blocks and 90,000 reaction templates. Reaction flow includes the same number of building blocks, but only 71 templates. And Reinvent provides none of this natively, requiring manual code. Chemical feature control is also unique to Makya. Users can define exit vectors, reaction filters, structural constraints, and physical limits during the generation. And Reinvents give these only as post-processing, and reaction flow provides no such control. And finally, Makya is the only tool with a native synthetic feasibility scoring and a full non-coder using interface. So in short, for synthesis-aware generative design with full control, structural integration, and non-code usability, Makya is really a standalone. And so with this being said, I just want to finally thank you all for being here, and hopefully across all these series, across this webinar, you were able to extract valuable information. And so I will give back now the word to Ele, and so we will be happy to take your questions.